Hey everybody, welcome to your horoscopes for the week. These are the horoscopes for the week ending December 17th. A little bit of crazy going on this week, specifically with the moon causing the craziness, which is always fun. Let's hop in and see who are the lucky ones for that. So we're gonna go ahead and get started as we always do with Aries. We've got Jupiter 29 degrees Pisces, which means it is officially back on the cusp of Aries. So you will start to feel its effects. And of course, anytime it's lining up with any planets in a negative way, you're going to unfortunately feel those effects too. Luckily, there isn't a lot of that. A little bit, not necessarily a lot of that. So that's kind of good. The moon's placement later on in the week is going to move into different aspects with Jupiter, though in a way that is a little bit difficult. So we'll get into that here in a minute. Focus is moving into self, with a little bit of a hint of the past, which is kind of an interesting thing when you think about it, really. Jupiter is all about growth and expansion, and you're focused on yourself currently as well as in the past. And in some cases, a lot of people can have difficulties with that because as you focus on all of the dumb stuff you did in the past that kind of sort of held you back, it really has a negative effect on you emotionally in many ways. But at the same time, we're all human beings. We've all been there. We've all done stupid stuff when we're young, and maybe even into our when we're not young anymore. Some of us more than others, I guess. Really just depends. And there's some people out there that have never done anything stupid. I mean, can you believe what that must feel like? I kind of am on the side of enjoying the fact that I did some stupid stuff in my life. At least, something exciting happened. It really depends on how you look at it. But I also look at looking back on that stupid stuff as not only entertaining, but a lesson. It's looking back on ways that you did things that obviously didn't work because it didn't turn out very well. And so consequently, you've evolved, you've changed over the years. And it's good to also focus on the changes that you've made and the progress that you've made rather than beat yourself up on how far you still have to go, if that makes sense. We're all human beings. Um, we all have faults. It's part of what makes us human beings. Why make such a big deal out of it? That's kind of where I like to take it when I'm in the right mindset, of course. Sometimes we just get to that point where we can't see a way out of the situation that we're in. But don't worry, every cloud has a silver lining. As we progress into the week here, and I'm looking at this moon moving around, we're going to have a little bit of an issue which is felt for literally a minute for you guys, which is really good, as the moon moves into opposition with Neptune and Jupiter, kind of into a bit of a mutable grand cross, actually, which is a little bit scary. Grand crosses are very difficult aspects, and the mutable signs just make it crazy. And even though Aries is not a mutable sign, unfortunately, with Jupiter's proximity so close to Aries, entering back into Aries, it is going to be felt a little bit. We're talking on Thursday just for a day. I tend to look at this for you guys as it's just like no matter where you turn, things are a little nuts. And really the lesson here for you guys is how much of that frustration you want to take on and make yours, as opposed to how much of it you just want to kind of wipe away, let it bounce off of you, because really it has nothing to do with you. You just happen to be there in the moment when it happened, kind of a thing. Or even if it is directed to or at you, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to take everybody's crap either. It's just, you're not necessarily taking everybody's crap. You just happen to be there for when all the crap is falling out, kind of a thing. Perception really is everything. And your mood in the moment really is everything too. Obviously, if you start this kind of chaos out in a bad mood, it's only going to progress throughout the day. So you want to make sure that you are aware of that, and that you're managing that, and that you're going through and taking techniques to lessen your stress throughout the day in order to prepare for a little bit more stress. But as you move out of that into Friday, that sort of goes away and things calm down just a little bit again. With focus on self, it's all about self-care. So self-care your way right through this and you will be fine. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And we're moving on to Taurus. Uranus continues to be retrograde throughout the end of this week. I think the retrograde ends, if not later this month, then into next month. So the end of it is coming. I just unfortunately don't have that information right in front of me right this second. And we continue to be in that square with Saturn. And of course, that square with Saturn continues throughout the week as well. So unfortunately, we're not saying goodbye to that this week either, I'm afraid. I'm just full of all kinds of really helpful information for you. Sorry about that. Focus is on the past this week, and in that square with Saturn, which is focused on our inner closet, I kind of unfortunately see this playing out as a lot of sort of old emotional stuff coming up around you guys this week. A lot of triggers, unfortunately, come up with that, I'm afraid. But those triggers really are, I mean, I agree, I hate them. I don't like being triggered. I don't like the process of processing the trigger. It's a very unpleasant prospect when you're thinking about it, and yet at the same time, the more you do that, the less you find yourself triggered. And that kind of progress really, over time, it really does help. I like feeling trigger free more often than being triggered, if that makes sense. And that's where I'm headed. It doesn't mean that I'm never going to be triggered again, unfortunately, because it still happens way more than I'd like it to. It just happened recently. And I don't like the process. I really, really don't like the process. But the end result usually works out. And that's kind of what this square is all about. When you add the moon to it, unfortunately, when the moon moves into Leo on, this is Tuesday. On Tuesday, it joins the square and turns it into a T square. The moon's focus is all on your day-to-day schedule, which basically means emotional experiences that are so much of them, unfortunately, it's interfering with your daily schedule, which is really annoying. I'm all for a self-care day. If you can take a self-care day, if you absolutely cannot do that and you just have to get through the day because you have things to do, which most of us are in that position, I feel that it's important. There are times, there's always a time and a place for processing your triggers. It's kind of where I usually go with that. I don't like doing it in the moment. I don't like doing it in public. And so one of the things that I do, unfortunately, this is bad, but it's for a good cause. I internalize all of it in the moment, and you're really not supposed to internalize it. But I do, I get quiet and I just sort of hold it in there, and I just tell myself I just have such and such amount of time before I can get out of here. And then I immediately will go home, and within the next 24 hours or so, when I have the time to be by myself, I will process through that trigger as much as I can. Sometimes even days afterwards, you'll find layers in that trigger that maybe you didn't see the first time, or it's a trigger that has come up multiple times, and each time you find a new layer, that kind of thing. Each layer is healing, and that's ultimately what it's all about. So fortunately, that's what I have for you guys this week. Fortunately, all of this Uranus and Saturn is going to end soon. The end is near. We'll just say that it is coming, my friends. I swear it is coming, and things will lighten up just a little bit once that ends. And maybe instead of focusing on our emotions so much and having these challenges, we can just have forward movement. Fingers crossed, guys. Fingers crossed. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And we're going to go ahead and move on into Gemini. Gemini's focus is on how you think. Odd for Gemini, because how do you think in like ridiculous ways? We'll just put it that way. But absolutely really fun. And I swear that in that crazy, chaotic, bouncing from one thing to another thing that you guys do, there is just some absolute brilliance in there. The issue with it bouncing from one thing to another is that a lot of times that brilliance is lost when it's just a little speck, boop, and then it's gone. So slowing down that process does help to kind of sort of keep track of all of those brilliant thoughts, because you guys have a lot of them. Mars continues to be retrograde this week, and with Mars retrograde focused on how you think, this creates kind of an interesting dynamic, actually, when you think about it, because Mars is all about aggression and ambition to a certain extent. Now, this can play out a couple of different ways. One is that maybe you're not having as many angry thoughts as maybe you have in the past, or two, maybe your thinking is very unmotivational. And that's actually more the direction that I want to go in, is that when your thought process is a little bit on the, what's the word I'm looking for here? When your thought process is a little bit more on the destructive side, it starts to tell you why you can't succeed or how you can't succeed, or in a typical Gemini way, to use the example of a Gemini that I'm thinking of right now, when things start to get overwhelming, the thoughts automatically go to flee this situation. Whether that's a good idea or a bad idea, it's sort of that fight or flight instance, for lack of a better way of explaining it. Mars in opposition with the Sun this week creates another complication. The Sun's focus is right in the middle of your career and legacy, as well as your long-term goals. So we're looking at long-term career goals here, which is definitely pointing us in the direction of maybe where those unmotivational thoughts are going towards, oddly enough, with my example. And then as we get into Wednesday and Thursday, the moon moves into a square with Mars, and by Thursday that becomes a mutable grand cross. Now, grand crosses are very challenging, very difficult. Mutable signs are very much here, there, and everywhere, and you're a Gemini, so you totally understand that mutable mentality. When you have a mutable grand cross, especially with the moon, that emotional moon being a part of that, all of a sudden it blows up into this huge challenge. So you have a small, I'm having trouble with my stinking thinking problem, and then it just blows up into my stinking thinking is going to destroy the world, literally. I mean, how many times has your brain gone there, really? Because it's just natural for your brain to go there. It doesn't mean that that's actually going to happen. The moon's focus is on your day-to-day schedule, which is in opposition with Neptune, which is focused on self. So this challenge, just for a minute, unfortunately just for a day, this challenge, I feel like when things get really crazy, your brain goes to amplify that crazy. And really, this challenge is coming up to show you that that is not going to help you this time. Keep your mind clear, keep your mind focused, and you'll be able to get through the crazy as if it wasn't happening to you. If that makes sense. I hope it does. And that's what I have for you guys this week. And I'm going to move on to Cancer. We are kicking off the week with the moon basically leaving Cancer. By the end of Sunday, the moon will be out of Cancer. It's just a little blip, and then it's sort of gone, which is good. As the moon is leaving, so we're talking about Sunday and, a little bit the day before, the moon's opposition with Pluto may cause a bit of a challenge with focus on those you love and Pluto's focus on those that love you. And opposition between those two houses basically creates a difficulty when it seems like those you love are supposed to be there to support you, and it just doesn't look like they are. And so this could create a little bit of a chaotic weekend for you, but it is gone and over by the end of the week, which is the good news. Also, the moon, as the moon leaves Cancer, it moves into a trine with Jupiter and Neptune as well, because of course in Pisces they're both water signs. Jupiter and Neptune's focus is on self, and I feel like this is a very interesting combination, actually, because I feel like Cancers put so much of themselves into other people because they really truly feel that by doing that, they're going to receive that back. And for most of us, we receive it back in a different way. And if we can't identify that different way, it becomes very emotional for us. And I think that everybody has been through that at some point in their lives. They don't feel like they're getting back what they're putting into the relationships and the people around them. So when you need something and they're not there after you've been there for them umpteen million times, it does cause you to feel like you're wasting your time with people. However, I look at it as the universe is sometimes telling me that I'm not supposed to be calling for help. This is a lesson I need to learn on my own, or this is something that I need to do on my own, or whether I like it or not, this is the situation that I'm in, and I have to do it on my own. There is no other option. I don't like it, but accepting it is a lot easier than wasting my energy fighting that and doing what I am going to wind up having to do by myself anyways. To me, it's all a management of energy and emotion. The more emotional you are, the more energy you're putting out, and thus you wind up sort of exhausting yourself. And I think that in some ways, this is how it makes it easier for people to fall into depression, because you're just expending so much energy, you're wearing yourself out, and your mind is telling you that you're worn out because you're depressed. It's just an ongoing cycle there. As the moon moves out of there, all of that calms down and things kind of sort of go back to normal, whatever that may be for you. Pallas Athene also continues to be in your sign this week. Pallas Athene being the warrior goddess, and in retrograde, that sort of feels like your inner warrior's been silenced a bit, if that makes sense. And this continues to point towards those you love. You may find yourself in a situation this week where you need to stand up for yourself, you want to stand up for yourself, but it's almost just like you are powerless to be able to do so, which is a very scary and a very annoying feeling. The more you focus on being powerless, the more powerless you're going to be. You just have to identify those thoughts as fear thoughts and try your darndest to lock them up in a chest and until you're done doing whatever it is that you need to do. The truth is that there's so many instances with people, whether they are family or friends or whoever they are. We have so many instances with different people that can be very complicated. And we have to lay down boundaries with these people in order to lessen the complications in our own lives. And that's not an easy thing to do, but it is an absolutely necessary thing to do, because if you don't lay down boundaries, it will go on forever and it will tear you down little bit by little bit by little bit until there is nothing left of you. And that's just not worth it either. So that's what I have for you guys this week. Moving on to Leo, the moon moves into your sign Monday and Tuesday, moving into a T-square with Saturn and Uranus again. This is your once a month T-square with Saturn and Uranus. I promise the craziness is going to end eventually. Sooner rather than later, as Saturn is finally direct and moving on out of Aquarius here in the next few months. So things are going to end with that, at least. Your square with Uranus, not happening for quite a while, unfortunately. With Leo's focus on your day-to-day schedule and the moon coming into your sign influencing this, of course, it's an emotional disruption, which is never pleasant, never fun. We never have time for it. I always chuckle at people, and I actually say it myself. I always chuckle when people say, this was such a horrible time for this to happen. Like, nobody ever says, oh my God, thank God this was the best time for this to happen. Like, there is no good time for bad things to happen, period. So the statement itself just, well, it makes no sense, but it's fun to say, I guess. I I don't know. I try to be aware of it now, just because for me it's such a ridiculous statement. Saturn's focus is on that inner closet. And of course, Saturn is all about responsibility. So Saturn is sitting there telling you it's your responsibility to clean out your inner closet, which is annoying as hell, by the way, if you want my opinion. And of course, Uranus continues to be retrograde. Focus is on the past. So what's in that emotional closet? A bunch of crap from the past, always coming up to get in the way of everything else that you have to do. Two things come out of this for me. One is, imagine that your emotional closet is full of goblins, and when there's too many goblins, they start to knock on the door. And if you don't open the door, they start to knock louder and louder and louder until they're all banging on that door. And if they bang on the door hard enough, that door is going to fling open and all the goblins are going to come falling out. And you're going to be having a cocktail party with very important people at that time. And it's going to be a really bad time for all those goblins to fall out. So basically, if we also don't clean out that closet, we're constantly hearing the goblins knocking, which is triggers over and over and over again. And the triggers are happening because this is a really angry root, and it really needs to be addressed, and healing has to take place. And the more you push the healing away, the more pain you're going to feel. A lot of this happens around grief. When people or individuals can't handle being emotional, they do whatever they can to push the thought of the grief aside. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to think about it. Eventually it catches up with you, and it is so overwhelming, and you just don't want that to happen. when you're in a meeting or you're trying to negotiate a contract, or any instance where there's people around that you don't want to share that with, period. And trust me, it always happens at the worst possible time. So yes, this is difficult and uncomfortable, but at the same time, it's also kind of a good time for this to come up, so that it allows you either some time to deal with this, or it's a reminder that you need to make time to deal with this. And the only thing that you can control out of the whole situation is the timing of when it happens. It either happens as in when it happens, or it happens when you decide it's going to happen. That is the only thing that you have control over with that. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And we're going to move on to Virgo. Virgo's focus is on relationships this week, and Ceres barely continues to influence that. I say barely because we're 28 degrees by the middle of the week. So within the next week or so, Ceres is going to move on. Of course, it's going to go retrograde and possibly come back, but don't know about that yet. So we'll just see what happens. Ceres, of course, is known as the Great Mother, and so rules things like nurturing and motherhood, anything associated with motherhood, and focused on relationships. This is actually very interesting because it really does showcase a time where it is needed for you to be nurturing in some way. I think in many cases, when we're talking about the sign of Virgo, Virgos, in my opinion, almost every Virgo I know knows everybody. And so the opportunities to be nurturing within a relationship, there can, in many cases, be a lot of opportunities for that. And I also feel like most of you Virgos are very nurturing people to your core. Of course, there's a tough exterior there to hide that part of you, which, as an Aquarian, I appreciate and understand completely. But deep down in the mushiness is a very compassionate and very nurturing person. And I feel like Ceres' influence over the last few weeks over this is just maybe sort of giving you an opportunity to really utilize that, to really understand it, and to really embrace that part of yourself. Because the truth is, it's one of the most beautiful parts of yourself. And I feel like in many cases, not for all Virgos, but for many Virgos, that part of you is hidden away, protected, like buried treasure. And well, Ceres is asking why, because it's one of the most beautiful parts of you when it comes down to it. The moon comes into your sign on Wednesday and Thursday. Wednesday moving into a square with Mars. Mars' focus is on the mind, and the moon's focus is on your day-to-day schedule. And that kind of sort of tells me that it's very important that you don't let emotional thoughts or things that are bothering you, that you're overthinking, get in the way of what you have to do that day. The sun's trines with Mercury and Venus, on the other hand, are really opening up some time for amazing things to happen in your career, which is why it's important not to let your head get in the way. Of course, as we bump on over to Thursday, things get really crazy as the moon continues that square with Mars, but moves into almost immutable Grand Cross, actually, with the sun as well as Neptune, and of course moves into opposition with Neptune at the same time. Again, focus on your day-to-day schedule. Neptune is focused on self, Mars is focused on the mind, and the Sun is focused right in the middle of career as well as your long-term goals. So we're looking at your long-term career goals. Now, I am looking at this in a couple of different ways, actually, because this is a major challenge. And yet things are lining up for greatness. Really. I mean, this is what I'm seeing here. Things are lining up for greatness. Two things about this. One, your overactive brain of, I don't think I can do that. And I'm not sure if that's going to fit in my schedule. And what about my social life? And blah, 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 blah. Your overactive mind is not going to help you in terms of creating these long-term career goals, if that makes sense. You're creating long-term career goals for success. And so stinking thinking is really going to get in the way of that. And it's going to hinder your success. So you want to manage that as much as possible, for sure. Also, the fears of time and not having enough time, and specifically not having enough time for yourself, you also want to omit. The key here is that you're creating long-term goals. Okay, you know what you want to do, and you know that it's going to be difficult to get there, but you still need to do it. Then make time for it. Make sure that the rest of your time is allocated accordingly, so that you're not shortening time on anything. If you need to make sure that you have time for you, or time for your family, or time for another job, or what have you, you are in control of that to a certain extent. So before you even find out how much time this thing is going to take up, which would be a good idea before you start worrying about it, find out and then start worrying about it. Or better still, start making a plan for it, and then you can take that worry and throw it right out the window, because you're just going to give yourself an upset stomach like you always do, right? So that's what I have for you guys this week. Moving on to Libra, as the moon moves into Libra on Friday, you will feel this opposition with Jupiter and Neptune pretty strongly, unfortunately. Also, well, actually, it's not just an opposition, it's a T-square, as the sun, of course, is squared with the moon as well. Which actually is a waxing moon on that day specifically. Focus is on relationships this week. Having the moon influence your relationships is never a fun thing, never a comfortable thing. And unfortunately, we're going to end out the week with the moon, as the moon moves into a challenge that's a little bit less terrifying, I guess, as the one the day before. We'll start with Friday, of course, as the moon's T-square with the sun, Neptune, and Jupiter creates a bit of a challenge when you're trying to focus on your long-term career goals and your goals for yourself, and maybe they don't necessarily line up with others in your family or people that you form relationships with. It's of course always better to sit down and have a discussion than a great big giant argument. I always advise that that's the better option, but in some cases it's difficult to avoid the argument. I think the best thing to do in order to make sure that you have as smooth a transition as possible in this discussion is to approach it in as business-like a way as possible. That way it doesn't seem like you want to avoid coming across as, this is what I'm going to do and there's nothing you can say about it, kind of a thing. That is going to be a major argument, obviously, especially if it's with your spouse. Just so you know, things do calm down a little bit as the moon moves on into Saturday, creating a bit of a square with Venus as well as Mercury. Both are focused on your career. So again, relationships and career still not lining up 100%, but again, you want to create as unemotional of a conversation as possible, even if the moon's emotions are influencing this. That is your challenge. So good luck with that. There is plenty of help, though, of course, as the moon moves into a grand trine with Saturn and Mars. Mars's focus is on your mind and how your mind works. Saturn is focused on your inner closet, really reminding you that old traumas and old triggers should not be influencing this conversation at all, as much as possible anyways, although it is of course possible that they may come up. So if they do come up, it's important to process your triggers rather than allowing your emotions to react to your triggers, if that makes sense. That's going to cause a much bigger problem. In my experience in relationships, and I am no expert on this whatsoever. I just know what, I can recall what works and what doesn't. And my own trigger reactions will sometimes cause what I know to not work to just come out and take over. And that rarely ever helps the situation, of course. So it's very important to try and maintain that as much as you possibly can. And if you can't, you can always give it some time and then come back to the discussion later on. So that's what I have for you guys this week. Moving on to Scorpio, focus is on finances this week, specifically your long-term financial goals. And this is actually a perfect time to do it at the end of the year, sitting down and looking at your financial goals for the upcoming year. In all honesty, I have a million years of experience in not creating financial goals for myself. And I can see where that holds me back in a lot of ways. So I am a huge fan of telling other people, of course, to create financial goals for themselves. It gives you something to work towards. So you're not just kind of willy-nilly floating around, if that makes sense. And if you haven't done them before, it can really seem like a very daunting process. You may even not know what your financial goals look like, like what to create in terms of financial goals. But it does make things a little bit easier. At least my Capricorn grandmother told me so. It does make things a little bit easier when you know what you need and you know it needs to go out and you know what you want, to sit down and just kind of put something together to guarantee that, and to make sure that you either make enough money for that, or if you're not making enough money for that, find ways to make sure that you're making enough money for that. Because also, a lot of people get stuck in the living paycheck to paycheck reality. And I feel like this may be stemming from being in that situation and not wanting to be in that situation anymore. When you're stuck and can't figure out how to get out of a problem, you're rarely ever actually stuck. There's just an opportunity there that you've never taken before. You don't know how it's going to work out. So you're afraid to take it. And the fact is that those who don't take risks rarely ever move forward. And consequently, that becomes a problem, and you remain stuck, and you remain in that sort of mind space that really gets you nowhere. So you guys have no planet to influence this at all. It is basically all about what you want to do. And don't worry so much about whether you achieve your goals or not. This is your first step towards creating some sort of financial independence for yourself. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to screw it up. But you can also have fun along the way. So what have you got to lose? And that's what I have for you guys this week. Moving on to Sagittarius, the sun continues to be in Sagittarius this week. Focus is on long-term goals, specifically long-term career goals for you guys. And the sun's opposition with Mars which is focused on how you think, actually is the first clue on how you do achieve those long-term career goals. It's all in your thinking. I feel that Sagittarians really do think on levels that are just crazy. No, any other way to describe it. They definitely think on levels that are outside of most people's ability to understand and comprehend what it is that they're thinking or talking about. But at the same time, there's a lot of brilliance in there as well. Being opposite to Gemini means that they have a lot in common in terms of that thought process. So the fact that there is an opposition there within their opposite sign, at least at the beginning of the week, it does kind of move out of that aspect towards the end of the week. But at least at the beginning of the week, this is actually very helpful, even if it is a challenge. Mars is all about aggression and in some cases ambition. So it can go either way. But when you got a Mars retrograde, and the sun's house is where you shine in opposition of this Mars retrograde, which is focused on stinking thinking. On one hand, it's slowing down your anger thoughts, which is the root of most stinking thinking. On the other hand, it's slowing down your ambitious thoughts as well, which is not necessarily going to be helpful for you. When the moon moves into Virgo towards the end of the week, this creates an even bigger problem as it moves into a bit of a mutable grand cross on Thursday. I'm sorry, between Thursday and Friday. I'm sorry. The moon's focus is on your day-to-day duties. Neptune's focus is on self. We're still looking at our long-term career goals. Mars is still focused on how you think and still retrograde. This actually is one of those things where it could be a big problem or it could not be a problem at all. It really depends on what you put into it and how you look at it. I think that at least with the Sagittarians that I have been blessed to know in my life, a lot of times when they make plans, they either will do one of two things. They will perfect those plans, which kind of takes up a lot of time and therefore they don't really get where they want to go, or they will overthink those plans and come up with a million different what ifs that could happen to destroy these plans, which is really a waste of time, and you really never actually get started on the plan when it comes down to it. So this actually is presenting this problem and saying, are you gonna start it despite all this? That's really the question at hand here. And the answer should be hell. And the answer should be, hell yeah, I'm going to. And I'm not going to let my brain or my overthinking or my over worrying or my over trying to prepare for the worst get in the way of what I want to do. So that's what I have for you guys this week. Moving on to Capricorn, Venus and Mercury dancing around in Capricorn with Pluto this week, moving into a square with the moon right at the end of the week as the moon moves into Libra, with both Venus and Mercury focused on career. They're square with the moon focused on relationships. Can actually create a little bit of a challenge when you're focused on some career goals so much that you're ignoring how this may affect the people around you, and the people around you may not appreciate that very much. So in order to work around that and maybe even avoid it, it's always a good idea to make sure that you discuss with your family any career plans, changes that you may have that would affect them in some way. And there's all kinds of different things that affect families. I mean, I've seen so many different scenarios played out in movies and in real life, you know, where families are forced to move because, you know, dad got an offer and, you know, it's in a completely different state and everybody's got to uproot in order for him to take this offer. He deserves the offer, of course, but it's always better if the family's aware of it first before all of a sudden he just comes home and says, guys, we have a week to move from California to Virginia or something like that. You can see where people might be upset is what I'm getting at with that. However, Venus and Mercury having a trine with Uranus, Uranus is very much focused on the past. So this is actually very interesting. Uranus is retrograde, so we're not necessarily looking out of the box. We're looking at more traditional steps. And basically, in terms of your career goals, it's telling you to look to the past for some inspiration on where you want to go from here, which can be helpful as long as you don't get stuck in any of those traps where you get too stuck thinking about different things in the past that happened that you have absolutely no control over anymore now. Pluto's sextile with Neptune as well as Jupiter is also helpful. Pluto is very much focused on those that support you, and Pluto's influence in that is saying your power lies really in those that support you. Capricorns tend to be very individualistic people. Their support systems are usually pretty quiet, you know, or I mean, they're there, but they don't go around parading their support system, if that makes any sense at all. But Pluto's influence saying your power lies within those that support you in a sextile with two planets that are focused on self. Your power also lies in your own self-support as well, as you knew all along. It's just not even a secret anymore, is it? So basically, we're looking at some career changes for you guys this week. Some very creative ideas, a lot of communication going on. We are going to see a Mercury retrograde happening in Capricorn very soon, within the next couple of weeks. So I feel like this is really a good opportunity to explore all of those options right now, so that you have a good idea of which direction you want to move into from here. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And we are moving on to Aquarius. Focus is on your secret closet this week. I'm not happy about that being an Aquarius, of course. At the same time, we've been focused on that closet and the possibility of needing to clean out that closet for a few weeks now. And I'm not going to lie, had plenty of opportunities come up and trigger that closet, if that makes sense. So yes, I am just as annoyed as the rest of you. Luckily, this too shall pass. That's what I keep telling myself. Hopefully that works for you guys as well, especially with Saturn looming over us saying, hey, it's your responsibility to clean out your closet. I know it's my responsibility to clean out my closet. I don't need you to tell me, Saturn. Oh, Aquarians don't like to be told to do anything. Actually, I don't know anybody that really likes to be told to do anything, but Aquarians are particularly stubborn about it. I will admit it. I will just throw my own crap out on the carpet there for you guys. It's true. I do not like it, but I am dealing with it, and hopefully you guys are too. We are continuing to have that square with Uranus. Uranus is focused on the past, so of course anything that we're dealing with in the closet is going to have a lot to do with triggers from the past, which is absolutely 100% true in terms of my own experience. However, we do have I'm sorry, actually, before I do this square with Uranus does turn into a T square about Tuesday, when the moon moves into opposition with Saturn. And the moon's focus is on your day-to-day activities. So these triggers, unfortunately, are going to get in the way of what you have to get done that day, which is really frustrating and annoying. So now Saturn is saying it's my responsibility to deal with my triggers and get my work done. Funny. Haha. Anyways, yeah. The most you can do is or what I do anyways, when I'm in a situation like that. I obviously don't like my triggers to be dancing around in front of everybody. I don't like to react to them in front of anybody. So I do what I should not do, and that's internalize them until I get home, and then I can deal with them at that time. So it's not a good idea ever to internalize your emotions, of course, and most Aquarians learn that the hard way, myself included. But I'm not internalizing them forever. I'm just putting them aside until I can deal with them in a safe environment by myself, preferably by myself, unless I'm forced to deal with them with another person, which is usually not the way. Most of the time I can do by myself. So it is a little bit, makes a little bit of a challenge, even more of a challenge there, makes it a little bit more emotional. And then we move on to something else, basically. So it's not quite so strong that it's actually getting in the way of your day-to-day activities. As we get towards the end of the week, Friday, the moon moves into Friday, Thursday. Where was it? The moon was actually very helpful to Saturn there, right at the beginning of the week as it moves into a trine with Mars. There it is. That's what I was looking for. Mars is very much focused on how you think, which is very interesting for Aquarians. Of course, Mars is in Gemini, and so of course that's very interesting for Geminis too. The two most intellectual, high thinking signs on the zodiac kind of coming together in some way, which is helpful. And it really kind of points me towards minding your thoughts and how your thoughts are influencing your feelings when it comes to these triggers. It's actually really important. I feel like a lot of times when this is inner child stuff, we're still thinking about it in terms of being a child. So we still have a child's perception about this problem and not an adult's perception. And in many ways, that is a huge part of the healing process, is allowing the inner child to understand that it's okay to have a child's perception, but then taking it over as an adult in order to understand the lesson in this, in order to embrace the challenge, maybe even look at it in terms of a more profitable way, how these things that you went through shaped you into the person that you are today, in good ways and bad ways. So there's a lot of opportunity there for advancement and for learning, and definitely opportunities that will help you work through those triggers. Nobody enjoys processing triggers. Nobody enjoys processing old emotional garbage. But if we don't do it, it weighs us down forever. And that weight, as we get older, it really does just get heavier and heavier and heavier. Trust me on this. I could almost write the book on it. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And finally, we're moving on to Pisces. We continue to have Neptune and Jupiter. Jupiter is 29 degrees Pisces. So we are about to leave Pisces, actually. But this week, for the whole week, is 29 degrees Pisces. So he's still there for a little bit longer. At least you'll feel his influence for the next few weeks until he moves out of a cusp with Pisces and moves on into Aries. Focus is on self this week. Neptune is all about perception, about intuition, holds, in some cases, she holds our very, very, very deepest secrets, emotional secrets. Jupiter is all about growth and expansion. Both planets are direct at this time. Both retrogrades have ended. Both planets in a sextile with Pluto, continued sextile with Pluto. Pluto's focus is on those that support you. And it's interesting how, with Pluto saying your power is in those that support you, lining up with the two planets that are in your sign where it's focused on self, this is actually a very interesting combination when you think about it, because your biggest support system is you. And I find in my life, and I know that lots of people find in theirs, that rarely ever is someone as supportive as you could be to yourself. People have other things to do. They can't always be there for you when you need them right in that moment. And a lot of times our thought process goes to, well, I don't deserve to have people around me. I'm just the one that takes care of everybody else and nobody takes care of me. And those kind of thoughts are very emotionally destructive towards what you're trying to accomplish. And so you wind up not accomplishing anything and just sort of spinning in that. And that's not obviously something that we want to avoid as much as possible. Both of these planets are in a square with the sun. Currently, the sun's focus is on long-term career goals. We're talking about you here and what you're going to do. What are your long-term career goals? This sort of challenge between these planets is kind of making it difficult for you to even see clearly what your long-term career goals are, or if you know what those goals are, how to get there, if that makes sense. And that how to get there also creates an emotional reaction for most Pisces. When you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, it's really hard to continue to have faith that there is one there, if that makes sense. So you have to be very aware of that. The more you slip into that mentality, of course, again, the harder it is going to be. We are, unfortunately, as the moon moves into opposition with Jupiter as well as Neptune around the end of the week, Thursday and Friday, it creates sort of a mutable grand cross, as we are also, of course, squared with the sun. The sun's in opposition with Mars. All this stuff is taking place. So mutable grand crosses are big challenges. Mutable signs, their energy goes from one place to another very easily. They move from one thing to another very easily. This creates this very almost chaotic energy, unfortunately. And the moon having an influence inside of it doesn't help it not become an emotional situation, especially when it starts to involve people that you love. It's because the moon is very much focused on relationships at this time. So it goes from this is what I want into, but it's supposed to be what we all want. And then it just becomes more complicated. And then again, it becomes even less clear to see what you need to do in order to achieve these goals. So I would just say that Friday and Saturday are not good days to think about these goals and to try and figure out how you're going to create these goals, because there's just too many other influences that will be coming in to try and influence your decision in a negative way. And it's just easier, I think, for you to avoid that. And if you can avoid it, you might as well avoid it. So outside of that, I wouldn't say things are incredibly difficult this week, but I would say that you are going to find some challenges or difficulties coming up that wind up getting more and more exasperated as the week draws on. So the more you manage your frustration, the easier it is, the clearer your focus is. On the days that you just can't manage your frustration, I don't necessarily see that there's a deadline for you to make this decision. So make the decision when the energy is right. What you also want to avoid is worrying about whether or not you can't or can't make the decision, because that is also going to get in your way. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And that is what I have for everybody. Thank you guys for hanging out. I'm Melissa Bruce, the Heavy Metal Psychic. Check out my website, www.heavymetalpsychic.com. We got a membership going on there. There's all kinds of fun stuff on there, including links to all my videos, everything that's going on. And there's, I'm sure, going to be more stuff coming up next year. Of course, I've got all kinds of ideas of things to get started with. So thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next week. Make it a great week, everybody.